Welcome back to the deep dive. Today, we are taking the corporate elevator right down to the engine room. We're exploring a skill set that is absolutely critical for survival in the modern workplace. But you won't find it listed on any resume, and you certainly won't find it taught in any MBA program.
No, you definitely won't. It's this strange, almost semi-secret practice that really defines so much of internal corporate dynamics. And our sources today, they give us this brilliant lens to look at it. We're talking about what they refer to as VUC.
Which translates roughly as task avoidance, or maybe a bit more forcefully, pushing work away.
Right.
But we need to be really clear right from the start. This is not just your, garden variety procrastination. This is a highly sophisticated, strategic and tactical art form.
That's the absolute core distinction. Simple laziness is transparent, it's obvious, and it gets you fired.
Yes.
It's subtle, it's strategic, and it often gets you promoted.
That's the crazy part.
It is. The sources define it as pushing work away while hitting 3 incredibly difficult goals all at once. First, you have to leave absolutely no discernible trace that you deflected the task.
Not at all.
Second, you have to retain all the goodwill and your professional image with everyone involved, your boss, your colleagues, even the department you just dumped the work on.
And the third one is key.
It's the most important. Crucially, you have to avoid accepting what the source material repeatedly calls dumb work, or, just outright exploitation.
It's the ultimate tightrope walk, isn't it? You have to keep up this image of being competent, of being cooperative.
Yeah, team player.
Team player.
Yeah.
Well, you're actively minimizing your exposure to the actual work, especially the kind of work that's ill-defined or unrewarded or just super high risk.
The sources call it a semi-white, semi-black art, and I think that's perfect. It exists right in that morally ambiguous gray zone.
And that gray zone is exactly what we need to analyze. It really highlights this central paradox of corporate life today. I mean, we operate in these systems that supposedly prize technical expertise, right, and efficiency and execution.
Supposedly.
But the skill that's most frequently used by the people who manage to survive, stay sane, and often thrive is this art of image-preserving deflection.
So that's our mission today. We want to understand why. Why has this avoidance mechanism become, in some cases, more prized than actual contribution?
We're going to unpack the structural, the organizational reasons why this environment forces otherwise competent, proactive people to become, expert deflectors.
And we'll look at the deep psychological cost of being a doer in this kind of system. And then finally, we're going to spend a good amount of time providing a comprehensive framework. A survival toolkit, really.
A toolkit for navigating this reality without sacrificing your competence or just becoming completely cynical in the process.
It's a deep dive into not just the tactic of task avoidance, but the systemic foundational rot that makes it the most rational, self-protective response a worker can have. So, let's start by setting the stage. Let's look at the observable, brutal office reality.
Okay, let's paint a picture. A universal office scenario. You're sitting in a meeting, could be in a conference room, could be on Zoom. The dynamic is exactly the same. A manager or an executive presents a new, complex requirement. Maybe it's a detailed cross-departmental analysis. Maybe it's a sudden crisis task that needs an owner. What happens in that room, in that moment, right after the requirement lands?
It's like a silent, synchronized dance, isn't it? The entire mood in the room just it instantly changes. People immediately disengage.
They do.
The source research notes the most common physical reactions are, looking down at your notes, staring really intently at your screen, or suddenly developing this intense interest in the ceiling tiles.
Anything to avoid eye contact.
Anything. Because you don't want to be the person who makes that accidental eye contact with the person who's holding the hot potato. And then the first move in the dance happens.
The first deflection maneuver.
Exactly. Someone, and it's usually a mid-level manager who's already pretty skilled in this art, they'll make the first move. And they don't refuse the task, they pivot.
They pivot with something that sounds like, genuine positive coordination.
Right. That's a fantastic initiative, but perhaps since Department A holds the primary budget line for this, and then they'll say something like, I think Department A should handle this because they are more suitable.
More suitable. That's the key phrase.
It's subtle. Not more capable, not more expert, just more suitable, which is a political term. It means they're better positioned to absorb the workload or the potential fallout.
And here's the part that just confirms the whole system is broken. The entire room, according to the research, it experiences this immediate collective sigh of relief.
You can almost feel it, can't you?
You can. It's heads nodding, people quickly chiming in, yes, that sounds like the most rational arrangement.
That collective relief factor is the proof. It's the proof that everyone in that room identified the work as a burden, unpaid, risky, time-consuming, and successfully pushing it away is a collective win for everyone.
Except Department A.
Except for Department A, of course. The transfer gets accepted, not because it's the right technical or logical decision, but because the path of least resistance has been found. The political goal of deflection was achieved.
And to make it all look like some kind of high-level process optimization, we wrap it up in these gentle corporate euphemisms that just mask what's really going on.
Oh, absolutely. The sources give us this whole lexicon of avoidance. We call it flexibility.
Or coordination.
Rational arrangement. My personal favorite is proposing a solution.
The most insidious one, I think, is redirecting to the right person. If you hear that phrase in your office, you can be almost certain someone just successfully dumped their unwanted labor onto some unsuspecting soul.
And this analysis is so important because it forces us to shift our judgment. You know, when this happens with one or two people, you can say, okay, they're lazy.
Right. It's an individual failing.
But when the entire collective, from the newest hire who learns this on day one, all the way up to the senior VP, when everyone is playing this game, you have to stop looking at individual moral failings and start analyzing the structure.
Structural phenomena?
Exactly. The avoidance isn't born from apathy. It's rooted in these deep structural fears. The fear of responsibility, which really just means the fear of judgment, the fear of losing face if you fail. But maybe the most powerful fear is becoming that constant, reliable team burden.
The person who gets all the unpaid work, all the poorly defined tasks, all the emergencies, just because you're good at your job.
Yeah. So avoidance becomes this pure, rational act of self-protection. Our research shows that in these environments, mistakes get magnified. They're remembered, they're brought up in review cycles for years.
But achievements?
Achievements are just swallowed by the system. They're forgotten within days. So if the reward for success is almost nothing, but the penalty for making one mistake is massive, why would any rational professional take on unnecessary risk?
The cost-benefit analysis just doesn't add up. It actually favors avoidance. If you're really good, you get penalized with more work. If you're quiet and careful, you're rewarded with stability.
Which brings us to the most, I think, unsettling part of this whole section, the actual danger of being truly competent.
This is where it gets really dark for high performers, isn't it? The source material offers this brutal but incredibly accurate truth. In many offices, being genuinely good at your job is a massive liability.
A huge one. You become a risk to your own sanity and your own workload.
The second you successfully pull off a really difficult task, you are automatically the default person for double the work next time, because you've proven you can handle it.
And if you deliver something fast, say you get it done in 2 days, your manager doesn't think, wow, they're so efficient. They think, great, the next project like this can also be done in 2 days.
You set a permanent, accelerated pace for yourself that no one else is held to.
You basically become the organization's free processor. That's the term they use. You're exploited for your knowledge, for your speed, your willingness to commit, simply because the system often relies on the competence of a few key people to cover for its own deficiencies. Poor planning, not enough staff, dysfunctional management.
And if you contrast the outcomes, the picture is just so stark. The doer is overloaded, they inevitably risk making mistakes because they're tired, and they take all the blame when something slips through the cracks.
But the astute avoider, the one who is skilled in IVIC, they're rewarded with stability. They're not called after hours. They get fewer surprise tasks because management has learned they're kind of difficult to pin down.
And they're seen as calm.
Calm and skilled in coordination. It's a perfect distortion.
The whole system is inverted. Doing just enough, performing at a steady, reliable 70% while you aggressively maintain a pristine image, that is seen as being smart and politically savvy.
Meanwhile, diving in to deliver 100%, to give it your all, that's the quickest path to exploitation and eventually total burnout. Avoidance in this context is just the inevitable, rational reaction to a system that punishes high contribution.
And if you listening to this have ever found yourself thinking, I really need to learn how to slow down so I don't get crushed, You're not flawed.
Yeah.
You're not lazy. You're just reacting intelligently to the mechanism we just described.
And now we have to look deeper. What exactly creates this mechanism in the first place?
Okay, so we know the behavior exists, and we know it's born from this need for self-protection. Now let's peel back the layers and analyze the structural scaffolding of this system.
Yeah, the why.
The why. And the source material really emphasizes a key failure point. Work distribution isn't based on capability, it's based on vulnerability.
That is the single defining characteristic of a dysfunctional system. Instead of the work flowing to the person with the right expertise or the bandwidth.
Which is how it should work.
How it should work, right? Instead, it flows to whoever is perceived as silent, whoever is known for having a hard time refusing, who lacks the power or the institutional leverage, or who just has that reputation of being the good, responsible person who'll clean up any mess.
It's so true. In a healthy organization, your competence draws opportunity. In a broken system, your perceived vulnerability just draws unwanted labor.
And this leads us directly to a concept the sources call the fluid dynamics of responsibility.
It sounds like a physics class.
It's basically the physics of the office. Responsibility, a lot like water, it flows from high power down to low power. It's always seeking the path of least political resistance.
So people with high institutional power, seniority, proximity to the boss, control over the budget, they have the leverage to push tasks up the chain or laterally to other departments.
Exactly. But the people at the bottom of that structure, the new hires, the quietest contributors, the analysts who don't have seniority or allies, they just don't have the leverage to redirect. They become the receiving end of the organizational bucket.
They absorb the overflow.
They absorb the overflow. And it's a mechanical process. It's determined by hierarchy and leverage, not by fairness or what skill set is actually needed.
This is why seniority so often dictates who can avoid work, isn't it? A senior employee can say something like, "My time is currently allocated to Project Alpha, which the CEO personally prioritized. This new task falls squarely into Department A's scope, and I will facilitate the transfer to ensure compliance."
It sounds so professional, so helpful, but a junior employee, what can they do? They can only nod and absorb the task, even if they know it's completely inappropriate for them.
And we can't really talk about work distribution without talking about the tools that are supposed to measure it.
Yeah.
The KPI culture, OKRs, the year-end reviews.
Right, the metrics.
They're intended to foster performance, but so often they just create this toxic, intense environment of cross-competition.
And that competition is the fuel for avoidance. Because the manager is often relying on those metrics to justify their own budget or their own success, the employees become ruthlessly incentivized to avoid anything that could result in a low score or, even worse, a negative comment in their review.
It completely changes the risk calculation. Why would you accept one hard, risky task that only has, say, a 60% chance of success?
When you could accept 3 easy, low-impact tasks that guarantee a 100% boost to your metrics, you wouldn't.
People start to avoid tasks that are hard to measure. They'll accept joint victories to look collaborative, but they will ruthlessly evade joint mistakes, making sure they're never the sole point of failure. The goal just shifts from high performance to surface perfection.
And that pursuit of surface perfection, it ties directly into another organizational mechanism, prioritizing smooth surfaces, or what the source material calls the eye.
This is such a profound insight into management psychology. The idea that many managers prioritize stability and the appearance of control over the actual correctness or efficiency of what's happening underneath.
Absolutely. If a manager's primary fear is internal drama or conflict, or having to report instability up the chain, they will naturally punish the person who tells the truth and reward the person who maintains ambiguity.
They prefer that surface harmony.
They crave it. So if a doer comes in and says, "Our process is broken, we need to completely overhaul this, and our team needs better resources," that creates conflict. It's necessary conflict, but it's still conflict.
And that manager will often react by just mediating superficially. They'll say things like, "Let's keep things positive," or "Let's focus on solutions, not problems," which is a way of protecting the system and failing to protect the doer.
Straightforward honesty gets punished, while maintaining a vague, harmonious front is considered clever management. And this is why deflection thrives. It keeps the surface smooth.
We should also probably acknowledge the cultural context that influences these dynamics.
Right.
Especially the emphasis in many environments on, harmony, hoaki, and saving face, you, me.
And just avoiding direct confrontation.
Right. And that tradition, it clashes head-on with what a modern organization needs, which is clear, transparent responsibilities, defined deliverables, and unambiguous feedback.
The collision of those two things produces what the source accurately calls an environment of blurred responsibility. Since direct, uncomfortable confrontation is culturally frowned upon, the lines of accountability become intentionally hazy.
Everyone starts relying on subtle cues, hints, and these deflection mechanisms, which, by necessity, just promotes the art of pushing work away silently.
And this directly fuels the reluctance to say no. Because of this cultural tendency to avoid direct refusal, nobody can just say, I'm too busy, or this isn't my job.
That would cause a loss of face. It would be seen as confrontational.
Exactly. So instead, we use these complex, softer, deflecting languages. It's never, I won't do it. It's, let me review the bandwidth for that, or I'll need to coordinate with Department X to ensure alignment.
Or the classic, maybe person A is more suitable, I'll check in with them first.
All of them are these sophisticated ways to deflect the task without losing that image of being a helpful, capable person. It's politeness weaponized for self-preservation.
And finally, we have to talk about the constant pressure cooker created by technology. We live in this, 4.0 era. Rapid deadlines, constant digital communication emails, Slack, Teams, tasks, pings firing nonstop.
And the increasing demands for multitasking and instant responsiveness.
The speed of acceleration is the unseen villain here. Technology has, triple the volume and speed of what's expected from us professionally.
At least. But organizational structures, they rarely hire the staff needed or fix the underlying inefficient processes. They just expect everyone to move faster.
So when that workflow accelerates into this perpetual, high-demand vortex of information and tasks, avoidance stops being a tactical choice. It becomes a psychological necessity.
You have to push back just to maintain enough psychological and physical energy to survive the week. The minute you fully accept one major, vague task, that vortex just consumes you entirely.
Pushing work away in that sense is literally about the preservation of your own life force and sanity.
And understanding that necessity, that's the bridge into our next section, where we look at the internal logic driving the individual to do this.
So we've established that the system is, fundamentally broken. But now we have to look inward. The research suggests that when you're faced with a flawed system, people operate based on psychological survival. They seek the safest positions.
Rather than strictly following the idealized expectations of their job description.
Exactly.
We're driven less by the rational desire to, maximize quarterly output, and far more by the primal instinct to minimize our personal exposure and risk. And in the office, the biggest risk isn't failure itself, it's being labeled incorrectly.
The invisible currency of labels, or NEN.
The power of the label is immense. The sources highlight that these invisible designations, reliable, difficult, team burden, high maintenance, they will define your career trajectory more than any quantitative performance report ever will.
And the label sticks so quickly, and often so unjustly.
The speed of mislabeling is terrifying. You could spend 6 months delivering excellent complex work, but if you miss one key deadline, maybe because you were handling 3 other emergencies at the same time, you risk being stamped not trustworthy or a poor planner.
Meanwhile, the strategically quiet person, who does 50% less work but is always agreeable in meetings, they maintain that good coordinator label.
So avoidance becomes the ultimate strategy to maintain the safe label and avoid the devastating political cost of being mislabeled. It's just rational to prioritize your image over challenging yourself, because in this kind of structure, your image determines your opportunities.
And this leads us to the core psychological cost for competent people, which is the burden of competence. This is that awful realization that once you excel at something, you become the organization's default button for it.
Yes. If you handle one crisis well, you are now the designated crisis handler for every future crisis that even touches on that topic.
If you accept one delicate, complex, cross-functional task, you are now the go-to person for all future complex, delicate tasks. The system has successfully leveraged your own skills against you.
The truly capable people, they learn this pattern very quickly. Good work equals future uncompensated exploitation. Accepting responsibility means becoming the permanent default recipient, the team's organizational sink.
So they pivot to avoidance. Not from laziness, but from a calculated need to prevent long-term debilitating burnout.
They're using this art to protect their long-term professional viability by refusing to become the bottom that catches all the collective unwanted work.
But what is it about the work itself that people dread the most? It's not always the task that requires the most technical skill, is it?
No, not at all. Our source material points specifically to ambiguous work, or vik moho.
People are absolutely terrified of vagueness.
They are. They fear tasks with unclear deadlines, a vague scope, unknown decision makers, or evaluation criteria that are totally ill-defined. They would much rather handle a project that is genuinely technically difficult, but has crystal clear parameters, than a vague one where the risk is unquantifiable.
And why is that? It's because in ambiguity, you risk taking the blame for things you cannot possibly control.
Exactly. Imagine a project with an unclear scope and an undefined decision maker. If that project stalls or fails, which vague projects often do, who absorbs the blame?
It's almost always the person who did the execution. The system deflects the failure upwards and pins it downwards.
Since management often prioritizes that bemate aim, that smooth surface, they will quickly sacrifice the executing employee to protect the ambiguous managerial oversight that created the failure in the first place. This high, unquantifiable uncertainty is what triggers the survival instinct to avoid that kind of task at all costs.
This avoidance of the spotlight and the desire to avoid personal blame, it drives what we call the decision push spiral.
It creates this ridiculous cascade, doesn't it? When a high-risk decision has to be made, the person who came up with the idea immediately pushes the decision authority to their manager.
The manager, who is also fearing the spotlight, pushes it to the collective team for consensus.
The collective then pushes it down to the young employee for initial research.
And it ultimately lands on the desk of the quietest, least politically sophisticated person in the room who simply cannot deflect it any further. The whole process is fueled by this universal fear of being judged negatively if the outcome is poor. Nobody wants their name on the failed idea.
And the subtle deflector has to master this tightrope walk, the dual image conflict. They have to constantly manage two separate, potentially conflicting images.
First, their image before the boss, which has to be cooperative and accepting.
And second, their image within the team, which has to show that they are not easily dumped on or exploited.
And AVIC is the subtle skill you use to optimize both of those zones. In front of the boss, you use the soft decline, or conditional acceptance, making it look like strategic coordination.
But within the team, you use silence, strategic redirection, and clear boundary signaling to make sure you don't become the permanent internal gopher. Maintaining that balance is the very definition of modern office politics.
And finally, let's just touch on the culmination of this whole cycle.
Yeah.
Burnout accumulation. After years of unacknowledged overtime, carrying the weight of the avoiders, dealing with unfair blame, and just constant unrewarded effort, employees accumulate this massive psychological fatigue.
At that point, the strategy shifts completely. After that burnout accumulation, a professional is no longer focused on optimization or high performance. They are focused purely on defense.
They become defensive, cautious, highly vigilant,
and incredibly sophisticated in image maintenance. And this isn't a personality flaw, it's a necessary strategic shift to prevent a total professional collapse. The ability to successfully push work away is literally adopted as a crucial defense mechanism against deep, ongoing emotional and professional exhaustion. They're just trying to balance their energy books.
This brings us to what is maybe the most frustrating part of this whole dynamic, especially for people who operate with a sense of professional integrity.
Yeah, the core conflict.
The unjust exchange between the doers and the avoiders, and the resulting paradox where the less productive, image-focused person often ends up with the promotion.
The sources are really clear on this. The doer, the person who's trying to drive actual results, is stuck handling what they call the double load.
Okay, what's that?
They're managing the high-effort real work. You know, the technical execution, the data analysis, the follow-through, the problem-solving, and at the same time, they're also managing all the high-stress political work.
Like managing conflicts, protecting themselves from blame, dealing with unexpected issues, chasing down late inputs from other people.
All of that. Now, the avoider, conversely, has successfully externalized all that high-effort, high-risk real work. They focus almost exclusively on the safer, superficial political work.
The communication, the reporting, the strategic deflection.
And maintaining that clean, calm facade. They cleverly avoid the parts of the job that carry any actual risk of error or exhausting labor.
The analogy for this in our research is just perfect. It's the engine room analogy.
It really is. The observer on the deck of the ship is always clean. But the person in the engine room, turning the actual machinery, dealing with the inevitable friction and the oil and the heat, they're always covered in grease.
And in the office, management prefers the clean observer. They promote the clean one, even though the dirty one is executing the critical functions and is therefore the most exposed to error and scrutiny.
The system is just designed to reward the smooth appearance of competence over the messy reality of contribution.
Which leads directly to the question that frustrates every high-contributing person on a team. Why does the less active, image-focused person so often end up getting power and getting promoted over the actual expert?
And the painful truth is that the system promotes the least risky individual, not the one with the highest contribution rate.
You have to think about it from the manager's perspective, right?
You do, and from their perspective, doers are often risky subordinates. They cause conflict because they expose systemic weaknesses. They'll say, the data is wrong, or this process is inefficient.
They might speak uncomfortable truths that challenge that smooth surface we talked about. They disrupt the manager's preferred status quo. They are, in essence, political disruptors.
Conversely, the astute avoiders are safe bets. They cause minimal friction. They stabilize the managerial machine by never highlighting a problem they can't quickly cover up.
And they keep the boss comfortable by actively avoiding drama or any deep structural investigations. They are the safe choice for advancement because their primary proven skill is minimizing managerial discomfort.
And this is where I want to push back a little on the critique, though. Because while it's frustrating, if the primary job of middle management in a large, stable organization is just stability and internal conflict mediation,
then isn't the avoider actually better suited for that role?
I mean, it's a tough question, but maybe. If the system values stability above all else, then promoting the person who excels at maintaining that stability, even if it's a superficial stability, is a rational managerial decision.
Rational for the system, you mean?
Yeah.
Even if it's devastating for the bottom line or for the execution team.
Exactly. They're being rewarded for the skill the management actually needs, which is political friction reduction, not the skill the company thinks it needs, which is high technical delivery.
This contrast creates these two highly polarized career cycles that our sources document so well. First, you have the doer cycle,
Which is do well, get overloaded, become prone to error because of stress, get judged harshly and mislabeled, and eventually burnout.
and then the avoider cycle.
Avoid excess risk and workload. Maintain a calm, stable image. Get trusted by leadership for being low drama and predictable. Get promoted because they are seen as low risk and politically safe.
The devastating consequence is just inescapable. The system accidentally punishes high contribution and rewards calculated evasion.
Mostly because it lacks the nuanced tools it needs to accurately measure true contribution versus superficial performance. If you can't accurately measure the value of the dirty work happening in the engine room, you're always going to promote the clean observer on the deck.
And the ultimate leadership perspective just confirms this. Managers actively fear drama. They choose subordinates who are low contention, low protest, and who maintain that smooth external facade.
And those are, almost by definition, the subtle avoiders.
So we have to conclude this section by realizing the conflict isn't really a moral one. It's not about good people and bad people.
No, it's about two different rational survival mechanisms that are born from the same systemic failure. The doer fears being exploited for their labor, and the avoider fears exposure and the negative label that comes with it. They are both responding logically to a flawed structure.
But the tragedy is that the doer is the one who is sustaining the company, while the avoider is the one sustaining the flawed management structure. We spent a lot of time analyzing the problem. I mean, the landscape is structurally flawed, it's psychologically taxing, and it rewards the wrong behavior. So now we have to transition to the most important part of this deep dive for you, the listener.
The path forward.
The path forward. How does the conscious professional maintain their competence and their integrity without being utterly crushed by this environment? And our source material provides a brilliant, highly practical survival toolkit.
We have to start with a fundamental philosophical shift. We could call it the Stoic principle of non-resistance. The core idea is simple. Distinguish between what you can and cannot control. You cannot fix the entire system. You can't change your boss overnight, and you can't dismantle the cultural preference for ambiguity all by yourself.
Trying to fight those massive systemic forces is just the fastest path to exhaustion and cynicism.
It is. The strategy is not to fix the office, but to learn how to walk through it successfully. The goal is intentionality, making sure your competence isn't weaponized against you. You have to control your reaction, your boundaries, and your professional focus.
And that leads us directly to the first practical essential skill, boundary setting.
Which is so much more nuanced than just saying no. It's about conditional acceptance. It's designed specifically to eliminate future ambiguity and to gently transfer the risk back to the system where it belongs.
The key is making your acceptance dependent on a change in the existing conditions. Let's get specific with some practical examples because this is where the theory becomes actionable.
Okay, so for example, instead of immediately saying yes to a new task, you pivot to information requirements. I'll need more finalized, actionable data before I can accept this scope.
Or, instead of just allowing yourself to be overloaded, you set resource boundaries. If I take this on, given our current priorities, we must formally adjust the deadline for task X or reallocate resources from project Y.
See the difference? You're not refusing the work, you're requesting the minimum requirements for professional execution.
And by saying something like, this falls under Department A's documented scope, I need to initiate coordination with them first through the official channel, you're protecting yourself from that vague responsibility while still maintaining the image of being cooperative and highly systems aware. It's hard for any manager to argue against procedural clarity.
Building on that, we have to master the art of the soft decline. The 3 sophisticated methods of refusal used by people who expertly manage their image while pushing work away.
What's the first one?
The first is the most common among high-level deflectors: refusal by condition. You accept the task, but you require a change in existing work or deadlines that makes the task unattractive to the person who's assigning it.
Give me an example.
I can absolutely manage this new marketing initiative, but according to our policy, I will require a budget increase of 20% for external auditing, and my work on the Q3 report will have to be moved to Q4. You show willingness, but you anchor the work to a finite political resource like money or time, making it costly for the manager to proceed.
Yeah, what's the second method?
The second is refusal by information. This is a clean deflection based strictly on company protocol or logic. You shift the task by appealing to an external neutral authority.
So you'd say something like,
I agree this analysis is crucial. However, the official process states that all vendor selection criteria are housed within procurement. I will transfer this immediately through the correct documented channel to avoid any procedural risks. You're not saying no, you're just upholding company rules, which is clean, logical, and politically protected.
and the third, which you said is the most delicate.
It is. It's refusal by proposal, suggesting another person who is logically more suited for the task, but framing it as optimization, not evasion.
While I could certainly take this on, I know person A completed the detailed training last week on this exact system, and they have better current information than I do. To ensure speed and accuracy, I recommend we leverage person A's superior expertise on this.
Exactly. You retain the image of being insightful and a systems thinker while successfully shifting the workload.
The common thread in all of these survival tactics is what you call the golden rule of clarity.
Yes. Before you agree to any new task, you must clarify the crucial elements to avoid a future disaster. This isn't just about managing your time, it's about strategically neutralizing ambiguity, which we identified earlier as the office worker's greatest vulnerability.
You have to define precisely the deadline. Is it firm or a target? The scope, what is included, and more importantly, what is excluded.
The decision maker, who has the final authority to approve or reject the work. The final outcome criteria. How will success be objectively measured?
You define responsibilities. Who is responsible for which specific part of the chain?
If you accept a task where even one of those 5 elements is vague, you are essentially signing a vague contract that guarantees you will later be used as the scapegoat for any inevitable failure or delay. Clarity is your strongest armor.
And here's the harsh but maybe necessary piece of advice that challenges a lot of our ingrained instincts. Abandon the office hero role.
The system rewards stability and predictable effort, not martyrdom. We have seen too many examples in the research of young, eager employees who sacrifice their health, work massive overtime, and fix everyone else's mistakes.
Only to be deemed unstable or too emotional when they inevitably reach burnout.
And the company will just replace the burned-out hero with a new, cheaper piece of labor. Being conscious means choosing your battles wisely, maintaining sustainability, and respecting your own energy balance. Be professional, but do not become the sacrificial lamb for systemic failure.
To achieve this critical balance between competence and image, the conscious professional has to learn to speak the 2 languages of the office fluently.
The language of work and the language of image.
The language of work is technical, direct, and factual. It deals with quantifiable reality. The data sample size is insufficient, or the process outline is physically impossible to complete by Tuesday.
But the language of image is political, softer, and proposal-oriented. It deals with perception. I propose we refine this process to ensure quality control, or let me facilitate a follow-up coordination meeting to ensure everyone's input is fully integrated.
If you only speak the language of work, you're quickly labeled as difficult, abrasive, or non-cooperative, the political disruptor.
But if you only speak the language of image, you're seen as vague, pleasant, but ultimately useless.
The skill is in combining them.
Yes. You use the language of work to set the facts and boundaries, and then you use the language of image to present those facts in a palatable, non-confrontational way. So, for example, the language of work shows the deadline is impossible, but the language of image says, I propose we refine the project plan to ensure we deliver the highest quality product, which will require adjusting the timeline to next Thursday.
You're speaking both. It prevents random work assignment and protects your image without compromising your professional integrity.
And finally, there's the existential stance. You have to internally accept the office's fundamental irrationality. It does not reward perfectly, it does not judge perfectly.
But within that absurdity, you can choose to live with intent. Maintain your core technical competence, hold on to your personal values, and choose your battles wisely. Don't let the structural flaws and the demands of avoidance extinguish the professional meaning you get from your own craft. Your competence is for you, not just for the system. #tag outro.
So what we've really distilled through this whole deep dive is a profound realization. Task avoidance, or VEEK, it's not a moral failing of the individual.
No.
It is a rational, psychological, and social response to a flawed office structure. A structure that consistently punishes responsibility, magnifies errors, and rewards calculated, image-preserving evasion.
And the reward for adopting these survival strategies, the conditional acceptance, the soft decline, establishing clear boundaries, it's not an immediate promotion. That may or may not come.
The true immediate reward is an improved, sustainable professional position over time. It's less exploitation, clear boundaries, emotional self-control, and a professional life that isn't constantly being consumed by systemic absurdity.
You transform yourself from being a reactive victim,
Yeah.
Constantly catching the workload thrown your way by the system's fluid dynamics.
Into an intentional participant who chooses exactly where and how they contribute their highly valuable competence.
And this leaves you, the listener, with a deep question to consider the next time you walk into the office, or the next time someone tries to hand you a vague, high-risk project that clearly falls outside your defined role.
The question is this: why do we fear responsibility more than we fear the injustice that is consuming our competence?
This question encourages you to redefine your role, not as a worker defined by the structural flaws of the system, but as an individual intentionally defining how they choose to live and contribute within that flawed system. This is the Deep Dive.